I'm thinking obviously of Leaving Neverland, where the point of view is presented as fact. But there's no other side to it. In fact, the director of that documentary said I had no interest in talking to anybody else. So I would challenge you to name one media outlet where if you went to your boss and said, I don't feel like talking to anybody who has any fact or opinion that might shoot down my theory, that film, that article never get written, never get made. So I found it interesting that HBO, they didn't have journalists come to the screening, they had movie reviewers. And if this had been presented as a movie and an opinion, fine. If they had presented both sides, like you would require in a courtroom, the courtroom requires both sides. So something like Leaving Neverland is the one side. In a courtroom, you get to get the other side, and then you get to make a decision. That didn't happen here. As I understand it, and you're an expert on it, I'm not, part of the reason for the First Amendment is to get at the truth. The lack of defamation protection for a deceased person doesn't get at the truth. It does not serve that purpose. So what I would suggest is there's no reason why defamation should not extend beyond somebody's life, at least for children and grandchildren who are affected emotionally and financially by things like these allegations in Leaving Neverland. Copyright law is life plus 75. Defamation might be life plus 20, 30, 40. You know, there is some way to set it up so the deceased can be protected. I mean, now we're about to listen to stories about Martin Luther King. I mean, starting in the 80s, James Baldwin had the famous quote that Michael Jackson would forever pay the price for being as successful as he was and buying the Beatles catalog. The press started on Michael in the mid-80s, and it hasn't stopped. And you asked the question, why not do a counter documentary? It's impossible to prove a negative. And quite frankly, there are a large segment of the press that doesn't care because it's not controversial.
So interestingly,
Just my opinion.
isn't that what you'd have to prove in a libel case? Wouldn't you have to prove the negative if you brought a defamation case on behalf of the estate?
Funny you should mention that, because when Michael was alive, there was an allegation by Victor Gutierrez. And it's interesting that the Robson Safechuck allegations are patterned right after Victor Gutierrez. And you know what happened? Michael sued him, won. The man suffered a several $million-dollar judgment, went bankrupt, and left the country. That's the difference between what HBO did and what happened when Michael was alive. Professor Dershowitz opined in an interesting article that if Michael were alive, HBO's lawyers would never have allowed them to do this documentary, at least in its current form, because they would have been required to at least offer some balance.